Okay, so for example 1, my notes look a little different than yours. I went to a PowerPoint that I had, but it's the same exact question. It's just going to have the grid on it to help me be able to show you how to graph this. Okay, so your paper says use vectors u, v, and w to graph each vector. And A is u minus 2w, and B is 2v minus u plus w. So the first thing let's look at is let's talk about a vector again. Remember, a vector is a directed line segment. It's got two things going on. It's got magnitude and it's got direction. So let's just look at vector u. So on vector u, notice it has an initial point and it's got a terminal point, okay? So the line between them connects it. So it's got an initial point and a terminal point. The arrow just tells us the direction that it's going. So we notice its magnitude, its size, is it goes 2 boxes or 2 squares, and its direction is straight down. Check out vector v. Vector v has its initial point and its terminal point, and it's got the arrow given its direction. Notice it's going diagonal upwards, up to the right, across 1 box, or 1 square. And look at vector w. It's also got initial point and a terminal point. The arrow is just telling us the direction. And we notice that it's going diagonally down to the right across 1 square. Alright, so let's graph these. First, let's graph u minus 2w. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to graph vector u. So put vector u. It's going to initial sides right here, and we know, looking at it over there, that vector u goes straight down 2 squares. So there's going to be my terminal point, excuse me. And I'm doing my best to draw a straight line there. Then we're going to graph 2w. So we're going to take our vector w here, but I want 2 of them, okay? So notice vector w goes diagonally down to the right across 1 square. So since I want 2 of them, we're going to go down to the right 2 squares. So, but because we're subtracting, we're going to go back to the initial side of vector u, which I should have labeled. Let me go do that real quick. So vector u, we're going to label. Now we can't write bold letters. We could use a marker maybe, but technically it's still not bold. But what we can do is we can put the letter u and then draw a little vector over it. And so that symbol's the vector u. Okay, so back to the 2w. We're going to subtract it. So when we're subtracting, we go back to the initial point and we're going to draw in 2w from there. So I started at the same initial point and I'm going to draw 2w there. So there's my terminal point. I'm going to put my arrow for direction. And so this is 2 vector w. Now, so for my resultant vector, because we subtracted, you start with what you subtracted. So you're going to start with that terminal point. And you draw back to the terminal point of which you subtracted from. So I'm going to draw back over here. There's my direction arrow. And so this vector right there is vector u minus 2 times vector w. And that's what we were wanting to find. So let's move on to part B. It wanted 2 times vector v minus u plus vector w. Alright, so let's do 2 times vector v. So notice vector v. And I want 2 of them. So I'll pick a starting point here. Vector v went up to the right, diagonally across 1 square, and I want 2, so I'm going to go across 2 squares. So I drew my initial point, I just drew my terminal point, and I'm going to put my arrow for direction. Now I want to subtract vector u. Remember subtracting? Oh, let me label this one. So remember, when we subtract, we go back to the initial side, and we're going to draw in vector u. So there's my initial point. There's my terminal point. Put my arrow for direction. And remember, when we subtract, our resultant is going to start drawing from the end of what we subtracted, so vector u, and we're going to go back to the terminal point of the first part, so the 2v minus u. I mean the 2v. Alright, now, you know me, you know I can't draw a straight line. Oh my gosh, it's not too bad. And put your arrow for direction. And so that line that I just drew there is my 2 times vector v minus u. That's this part. Now we've got to add vector w. When you add, you're going to start with the terminal point of what you're adding to. So where I just put that red arrow is where we're going to start at, because that is the terminal point of the 2v minus u. Alright, so now we're going to add w. Well, notice w is going diagonal down to the right 1 square. So we're going to go down to the right 1 square. Got my initial side up there where I started, my terminal side point where I'm ending. Put my directional arrow. And so this is vector w. Now to draw my resultant vector, when you add, you start at the initial side of the beginning. So down here where I'm putting that blue dot, to the terminal side of the last part. So I'm going to be drawing this direction. So I should have changed color. Let me change color for us. I'm trying to be consistent and give everything its own little bit. I used a green. Use this brown looking thing. Alright, so again, here's the initial point, and I'm drawing to that point right there. That's my terminal point because I was adding. Put my arrow, and what we just drew in there was that 2 times vector v minus u plus vector w that we just drew in. And there's our resultant vector that it was after.